All right, did you get the notice of recording? All right, so welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. That you are now in the community with Latitude Regenerative Real Estate. This is a part of our Regenerative Real Estate Workshop series, where we try to aim for every third Wednesday as a workshop where we're inviting some of our ecosystem partners to share their expertise and have a generative conversation together in community. For us at Latitude, just a little more about us, and as the conveners of this call, we're transforming how we inhabit the planet through real estate sales and consulting. Latitude's mission is to transform homes and habitats by incorporating regeneration into real estate services. Brokered by eXp Realty, we are expanding into a global collective of change agents dedicated to the health of people and planet. And here, just want to share a little bit about how people get to know us, participate with us. Starting with a call like today, you can learn from our on the right side of the screen. You see that join the ecosystem directory of our Value Alliance businesses. Ian and Kristina are one of those aligned businesses in our field. And if you have a business that feels aligned and you'd like to learn about becoming an ecosystem partner and be in our directory, feel free to let us know. And then in the middle, we have a Mighty Network where we have an online community where you can join us and learn about regenerative real estate and be in a community of practitioners from around the world, mainly North America, but a few international folks in the community. And there's a free membership and there's a $50 membership as a regenerative practitioner that gives you access to calls like this as a part of being a member. And then lastly, if you're looking to buy, sell, or transform your place, we have agents and consultants in multiple parts of the country. Feel free to reach out. And then for today, we are convened here today to learn about leveraging the innovative Farmland Commons model to ignite regeneration. And I'm going to take off screen share so we can see each other again. And I'd love to introduce our speakers, Kristina Villa and Ian McSweeney. So, welcome everyone. And I just want to share a little bit about them before I hand it over. And just to check, do you hear the bell when people come in the room? Okay, great. So a little bit about Ian and Kristina. They have dedicated their efforts to establishing and engaging with more than 100 land trusts, community organizations, as well as regional, state, and federal partners. Through these collaborations, they have provided crucial support to over 100 farm projects, ensuring their success in achieving protection, secure tenure, agricultural sustainability, responsible stewardship, and fostering community and commons ownership and tenure structures. And before I hand it over to each of them, I'd like to share a little bit about each of them. So when they'll elaborate and give you more of a robust bio. But first for Kristina Villa is, did I say, is it Villa or Villa, Kristina?
Villa, thank you.
Villa, all right, yeah, thank you. So Kristina Villa is a farmer, communicator, community coordinator who believes that our connection to soil is directly related to the health of our bodies, economy, and society. With over a decade of farming, communications, and fundraising experience, Kristina enjoys using her skill sets to share photos, stories, and information in engaging ways which help to inspire change in human habitats and mindsets, causing the food system, climate, and overall well-being of the world to improve. Kristina has spent the last several years of her professional career saving farmland from development and securing it in nonprofit land holding structures that give farmers, stewards, and ranchers long-term, affordable access and tenure to it. Most of her work in the land access space has focused on equitable land security for BIPOC growers, addressing the inequities and disparities of how land is owned and accessed in this country. And one brief word about Ian, and then I'll let you both take it from there. So Ian and his family hold ownership of a farm in southern New Hampshire. They have successfully executed They successfully executed a conservation easement in collaboration with the USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Services, which underscores their commitment to stewarding a diverse range of food production environments, pollinator habitats, and certified tree farm forest. Ian's exceptional dedication to sustainable agriculture has earned him a notable recognition as an Ashoka Fellow, Chipotle Fellow, and Distinguished Fellow of the Food Solutions of New England Leadership Institute. So I will hand it over. Who would like to share first?
Well, thank you, David. Thanks for inviting us, and great to see everyone here. Bear with me for a minute. Let me just get screen share on, but we're grateful to have this time together to share our work with all of you. And really, yeah, we're just back from a national conference where we were with Mark, who's also here. It's great to be together in conference and share and connect. It's also great to have this Zoom environment where we can connect in from all over. So really wonderful to have this time together. So can everyone see the full screen and everyone can hear well? Nice. Okay, great. Well, we'll dive right in. So we are the Farmers Land Trust. Our work is on building kind of a resilient new model for holding farmland in community. Our work is in kind of guidance, support, consulting, and resource sharing with communities, farmers, farmland owners, nonprofit land trusts around the country. And our work is all really to transition land, farmland, land that feeds us, into a new relationship, a relationship that values the interpersonal connection to land, the kind of nutrients it provides the ecosystem, the nutrients it provides us, and really a relationship that removes the marketplace value and commoditization of land and brings it into community-centered holding. So our work is through nonprofit land trust structures that hold land permanently, and we'll talk a lot more about the structure that we use and kind of examples of how land trusts work, both conservation and community land trusts, and now how we've pulled from both to create this Farmland Commons model. We'll move through fairly quick in the hope that there's ample room for questions at the end. We'll share these slides after the fact for all that want them. This is being recorded as well, so that'll go out to everyone. And we're also happy to be a resource, so reach out to us. The final slide we'll have a way to get in touch with us and reach out, but you can find us at thefarmerslandtrust.org. There's contact info there, and you can follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter, and find out ways to collaborate and contribute. So as a brief introduction, I'll just expand briefly on what you shared, David, and then Kristina will do the same, and then we'll dive right in. And so thank you for this. So yeah, Ian McSweeney, I've had a little over 2 decades in this work, and this work is really supporting landowners, farmland owners primarily, to build transitions and to build kind of long-term vision around farmland protection through conservation easements and through work with land trusts, farmland transition to next generation farmers, farmland tenure for farm viability, all towards farms that are growing community, growing food, and really stitching together the fabric of relationships to people, to the land, towards the future. So I'm glad to be here, honored to share this time together. And really big picture, I hope that our alignment around working with landowners, entering and exiting at that point of transition, sale, is something we can explore collaboration on. because there's a tremendous opportunity to bring about the future we all value and we all look towards at that point of transition with landowners. So I hope this presentation can spark interest and further conversation and ways to collaborate with landowners at that point of transition. Thank you. And Kristina?
Yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you. I hear you talk all the time, but every time I'm like, so inspiring. I'm so glad I get to work with you. Yeah, thank you, everybody. My name is Kristina. I feel like David did a great job introducing me and my work, so I appreciate that. So I'll just add a little personal intro, which is that I live in Middle Tennessee. My partner and I have a farming business. We grow vegetables using biodynamic and organic methods, and we also have a herd of dairy cows and a 4-year-old little boy. And yeah, I'm really honored to get to be here with you all and find ways to collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristina. So yeah, we'll dive right in. We're going to start giving just a brief framing on conservation land trusts, then on community land trusts, and then on our work. So conservation land trusts are a nonprofit entity that's been around for 100+ years now. It was started by trustees of reservations in Massachusetts. They continue to operate and be a national leader in many ways. They work both to protect open spaces and natural areas and the built environment, historic preservation, community preservation. They own multiple farms they lease out. They own multiple kind of public spaces, whether they be historic homes or museums or kind of natural open spaces that are scattered across the state of Massachusetts. And, they started this work over 100 years ago. Many more land trusts, 3,000 approximately, have grown up over time around the country, doing this work that is focused on primarily, there's always exceptions, but on natural resource protection. So things that there's a IRS code 170H, that you could Google and look up. The language within that defines kind of the areas within which conservation land trusts work and why they hold land to, some combination of those natural resource, scenic protection measures is why they hold land for many reasons. They hold land, both holding title to land, which has been their work from inception with the trustees in the late 1800s and still continues to be now. In the early 1980s, at first in Massachusetts, as conservation restriction, and then later through federal policy became conservation easement. This new enabling legislation allowed land trusts to achieve their mission of this protection of natural resources through holding just specific rights in the title to property. So a conservation easement holds specific rights, the rights to development, the rights to extraction, the rights for industrial commercial uses that are everything except agriculture, forestry, recreation, education based. So a conservation easement takes those rights, separates those from the title, and then those rights are held by that conservation land trust through a conservation easement document that's recorded with the deed to the property and permanently restricts the property for those reasons. So the conservation easement removes those rights and then in effect extinguishes those in that they're held by a land trust permanently to monitor and enforce to make sure those rights are never exercised. So you can see on this graph that really the beginnings of a conservation easement led to significant growth in the number of land trusts. So many land trusts only work with conservation easements or almost exclusively work with conservation easements, which means that many protected lands across this country are held privately with a conservation easement held by a land trust. So, for many of you in your work, you may come across land that you're helping assist that transition on where it is encumbered by a conservation easement, or in the process of that transition, a conservation easement might be considered, and it might be something you may want to suggest into the mix. And there's a lot of land trusts scattered across the country that do that work with conservation easements, the amount of acreage under protection by state and local land trusts. So this graph does not include federal ownership of land, but state and local land trusts work, and the number of acres significantly increased with the work of conservation easements. So easements and title to land are how conservation easements work, and that's the work of conservation land trusts across this country. And many are different, so there's really not a one size fits all, and there's a lot of innovation that's beginning in parts of the country with some land trusts, but by and large, they're focused on protection of raw land for natural resource benefits.
Thanks. Yeah. And so I get to talk about community land trusts, which it is true also here to say that we are talking about typical community land trusts, and that there is, of course, innovation in this field. But in general, we'll talk about what community land trusts are and how they operate. Oh, I'm not controlling slides. You are. Okay. Thanks, Ian. Okay. So as most wonderful things in this world, the Community Land Trust was created by people of color and then later co-opted by mostly white people. The very first Community Land Trust was an act of Black liberation. It came about in 1969 as a way for Black people specifically to opt out of a system that was not serving them, to have access and control over the food that they were growing and the food that they were eating, and also the homes that they were living in and the communities that they were building. So the very first Community Land Trust was actually based on agriculture, was based on this farmland, was in Georgia down, sorry, my cat is trying to drink all of my beverages. Okay, thank you. And then since then, community land trusts have evolved to be mostly focused on the built environment and have gone away from focusing on agriculture or land and have now focused mostly on housing. And so the way a community land trust typically works now is that a community land trust is a nonprofit that owns the land, and land comes into a community land trust by either donation or being bought by that community. And then people either own the buildings or lease the buildings, but that the land underneath those are always owned by the community land trust. And this model is really wonderful in a lot of ways. So one of those ways is that the people who are engaging with this community land trust are able to build equity in the way that they're able to pull money out of their lease or by selling their property after they are done inhabiting it. And also because a community land trust is hyper local and is very often run by a board that is the majority of people who live there and are part of that community and who are interacting with that land and those houses. Community land trusts are a really wonderful solution to access, security, and affordability of housing, and make it so that people who would typically not be able to afford housing on the open market can do so through these community land trusts. It's also really wonderful in saving and preserving space for the people who live and are part of that community. Thanks. And so now we get to tell you about how we're innovating using both of the best things that come from the conservation land trust and the best of the community land trust to form this third type of land trust, a commons land trust, by using that hyper-focused local parts of the community land trust and the access and equity and applying it to farmland and applying it to conserving land.
So we carry forward this work with farmland, with farmers, all with the understanding that farms and farmland is in crisis in this country. There's, the text here you can see, and there's stories. There's stories of people, of community and land that are in crisis right now and continue to be in crisis right now. And, it impacts all of us. It is our food system. It is Mother Earth. It is where we live. We're depending upon carbon sequestration and soil health to mitigate climate collapse, like that depends upon farmers having viable businesses and security on land and the ability to steward land. Like we're counting on farms to feed us, to feed our community, to bring nutrients back into the earth and into our bodies, and yet they're struggling, and it's only getting worse. And as land transitions, 2,000 acres of farmland a day come out of production. 37 mid-sized farms a day close from 2012 forward, according to USDA. Like farms are being lost and farmland is coming out of production. So we're moving in the wrong direction in these ways, and we really need to address this. And so our work is focused on farmland and farmers. Because of those crisis points, our work is also focused on farmland and farmers because we recognize that farms can be the center of communities. Farmers are cultivating culture, and they're cultivating learning, and they're cultivating the soil. And they're such a central part of communities, and farmland is central to that. So how do we interject into these systems with a new model, a way to support success? So our model, is focused on the work of protecting those important farmland. It's focused on the work of that transition that brings many of us here together in our work of that assisting buyers and sellers in that transition of land, assisting families who are needing to either transition to next generation, or in most cases in farming in this country, it's recognizing that their generational holding of land is coming to an end, and they're needing to find a next steward for the land to carry that forward, who is not related to them, and who may not have grown up on that farm, and yet has great wisdom and great compassion and great dedication to agriculture. So how to assist that generational transition of farmland that's underway right now, that we all experience and are all connected to in some ways. Our work is focused on regenerative, organic, and biodynamic agriculture, feeling that those practices are really aligned with us and are healing the earth and are growing nutrient-rich food. We understand the need to kind of bring innovation to the capital needed, to the transaction, to the legal structure. So we kind of pull in different aspects of community and conservation land trust work. We pull in philanthropic capital and investment capital. We pull in that kind of relationship to and values aligned work with farmland owners as they exit out and farmers as they come in, all to build this new model.
Thanks. And so all of our work is focused on transacting land, creating these farmland commons, and bringing land into these farmland commons. And these farmland commons are really addressing all of these points of crisis that we were just talking about. Young farmers cannot access land, and it is keeping them from becoming farmers. Aging farmers cannot let go of land and retire out because the economics are not working. All across the country, 98% of land is owned by white people. There are so many issues with industrial agriculture and the way that that is impacting Earth and creating climate collapse. And really, this model is addressing all of those things and bringing more equity to land and people, and focusing on protecting farmland and ensuring access and tenure to farmers and growers who will use regenerative ecological stewardship practices on that land. So the way a farmland commons works, it is first created as a 501c25 when a minimum of 3 or up to 35 501c3 nonprofits come together to create this farmland commons. So this farmland commons as a 501c25 is a limited scope landholding entity that is designated by the IRS to only hold land and manage that land. So this farmland commons, this 501c25, can hold the deed to land and then give lease out to farmers, ranchers, and stewards to manage that land. We see that this is a really great model for bringing community support and resilience to farmland, and that it helps nonprofits who want to be involved in how land is owned and how tenure is given without getting into mission creep or without costing their organization too much time and energy, and while also being able to utilize the resources and support that they can provide to the farmland and to the stewards of that land moving forward. And so when we help create these farmland commons, we can be part of that as a 501c3, as the Farmers Land Trust, or we can also help other organizations and other communities create them without us. We are living into creating these farmland commons as part of our organization, and also knowing that we don't have to have the power and control over these farmland commons, and that a movement really happens when everyone has access to it and when everyone can do it on their own. And so through that, we are excited to be partnering with organizations, communities, and nonprofits all over the country to create farmland commons that are interconnected, but not being held and controlled by our single organization. And so an alternative model to the farmland commons is this 501c2 structure, which operates the exact same way, and everything I just shared is still applicable. It is only one 501c3 nonprofit that incorporates the entity instead of 3. And the reason that we advocate strongly for the C25 model is because it brings more resilience and support and interconnected community versus being held by just one organization. But both are possible, and both still get the same effects and protect the land and are able to do all of the same things. So once a farmland commons is incorporated, it uses bylaws, and then a board of directors run and manage that commons. This board is made up of members from the nonprofit or nonprofits, which are the parent entities of this commons. It also includes community members who bring other supports to that farm and to that steward that is needed beyond just holding the land. So board members could include people who offer technical assistance, business support, funding resources, legal experience. These are all things that farmers and land need to have resilience and longevity in their businesses and in their livelihoods moving forward, which goes beyond just holding the land. So by bringing these people together to be part of this commons, they're also supporting the longevity for this farm business. And then most importantly, the farmer, the steward, the person who's actually living on and stewarding and caring for that land is part of this board, which means that they are intrinsic to how decisions get made and having control over what happens. So as you can see, this is very much based on that community land trust model, where the board is very local to place and where the leaseholder has authority and power on the board. That board is then in charge of conveying lease out to the leaseholder of that farm and really creating those lease terms, managing that budget, and collecting any revenue, which only comes from any lease revenue that is generated, which lease revenue is based off of the lease terms, which the farmer themselves get to be part of. So that is a very interesting and wonderful part of the model that gives a lot of equity and control to the farmer who's on the ground. And then, yeah, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So this lease then is conveyed to either farmer, steward, rancher, which can look many different ways. In some cases, it has been an individual farmer with a for-profit business that is an LLC. In other cases, this lease could be conveyed to a nonprofit, which is then an incubator farm, which then subleases to other farmers. It could also look like leasing to multiple farmers with multiple leaseholders on a single piece of land. It could also look like a cooperative. It can look like anything. And that's really one of the great benefits of the Farmland Commons also, is that it is a replicable and scalable model that we have seen and can be applied all over the country to fit the needs of individual people and individual parcels of land and individual communities and what they need and what matters to them and how they will have food and land sovereignty. So instead of using conservation easements, which, I'm sorry, I'm I'm gonna keep talking about that for a minute. Thank you. Instead of using conservation easements, which are set in stone cement documents that can never be changed and don't breathe at all, we use instead this lease. And this lease is where the conservation language is spelled out and the stewardship practices are ensured. So a lease can be updated and can be fluid and can be a living document that can meet the needs of the farmer. We have found many times that conservation easements, although well-intended, are set and then not able to evolve with time and are not able to meet farmers in their regenerative practices that are needed to really steward land in an ecological way. These leases can also be passed on to next generation farmers. So if farmers have children that want to continue farming, they're able to pass that on to the next generation. These leases can also be sold to the next generation. So any equity that has been acquired through that lease can be sold and gotten. It can also be that these leases operate similar to a ground lease would with a community land trust. So it could be that the commons holds the land, but not the housing that the farmer lives in which case the farmer could then sell their home and build equity that way. So this model really allows a lot of flexibility in how equity is gained, in how land is held, and in ways that promote viability in economics, but also in the health of Earth. Thank you.
So as a recap, there's a lot we shared. There's a lot more not shared that gets into the details, but our work is focused as a land trust using 501c2, 501c25, and then us as an organization and other partner organizations as 501c3 nonprofits. So nonprofit holding title to land and then conveying lease out of that land. And through bylaws, articles of incorporation, deed encumbrances, lease, and other easements and management plans is where the kind of agreements and details of this are kind of memorialized, tied to land, or memorialized, connecting the parties together, framing relationship and expectations. Many of these projects partner with other land trusts. So, a conservation easement, as was described, could and definitely is part of many of these farmland projects where conservation land trust holds conservation easement on some of the land, protecting that land for its goals, and then the title to land is held in this way to convey use to a farmer. Other ways to collaborate with other farm and food system partners to get at really supporting a viable farm. Like our work here is in a nonprofit land trust structure to achieve these goals. Our work is also recognizing that all those points of crisis that mentioned and the reality that financially it is a significant challenge for farms to be viable. And it's especially a challenge for those mid-sized farms that are growing the food we value and we eat, that are growing community, that are stewarding the ecosystem. They are strained financially in many other ways as well. But through this nonprofit structure, we're able to relieve that market-based pressure of the land. And that makes a big difference for many farms. There are many farms that can work without this model that, are at different scale, much larger, or much smaller, that financially it can work just fine. Or they have off-farm income, or they already own the land generationally. Like, this is a fit for some and not for others, but this is really a fit that addresses the financial crisis that farmland and farmers are in. So I wanted to really briefly kind of just touch on two examples. Happy to kind of get into questions around these examples or take questions in a different direction, but wanted to introduce these two examples just to get us kind of grounded with a farm and some thoughts of how mechanically this works. So this first example is a project, a farm, a community I've worked with on a number of projects over the years. It's this farm, the Temple Wilton Farm in southern New Hampshire. It was one of two founding farms of the modern CSA movement. So taking the subscription agriculture that was created and existed in the Black farming communities in the southeast part of the country. White farmers in 1984 came up with this idea, pulling from other community shared ecosystem models around the world to create the CSA model that we're all familiar with today. So the Temple Wilton Farm, an Indian line farm in Massachusetts, created this modern CSA movement that's grown significantly to where we are now. The CSA has many different models and ways it's used around the country. But overall, the Temple Wilton Farm both thought of the CSA as a way to kind of create a new relationship to money and relationship and shared risk for the farm business, but also saw the potential and need for the CSA model to be used for land holding in community. They created the CSA business model in 1984. That took off, was wildly successful for them and many other farms. They struggled with land security and they never owned the farm they were on. And 27 years in, the farmstead they were on was at risk of being lost. It was privately owned. They had an unsecured lease. And I had the fortune of helping them acquire farmland over time into this ownership, into a nonprofit ownership. And then 27 years into their business, had the fortune to collaborate with them to create kind of a trial pilot to what we have now, this Farm Commons work, where we created a community nonprofit. We raised both donation capital and investment capital from their community and from the public at large who valued CSA farms. And we raised the capital to acquire the farmstead, bring it into this community-based nonprofit ownership structure that has farmers and community CSA members on the board. And now the nonprofit owns the title to the farmstead. The farm has a 99-year lease, and they continue to operate now and are continuing to work through generational transfers and kind of business viability side, but they know the land is secure. With security on the farmstead, they've expanded their apprenticeship housing. They've expanded their operations on the dairy side to bring in a lot more cheese production and milk production for the community and public at large. They've expanded and have a well-regarded cafe on the property now that draws in people from all over. So because of that land security, they've been able to diversify their business in many ways and build a lot more long-term financial sustainability into their farm operations. Because of this model, they've also engaged the community at a much deeper level. Instead of just the annual CSA relationship they had, where the community members were supporting the annual business, many of these community members are now committed to the farm's ownership and have donated money and invested money for the long term to ensure that this farmland continues to be held in community and it continues to be stewarded and actively used as a biodynamic farm for the community. The other model to touch on is a model that project that I started with partners about 7 years ago now. It's still working its way through the permitting process. So this was a old historic neglected fallow farmstead. Houses in states of disrepair. Fields, some of them were left open for leased out for silage corn production. A lot of the rest of the property, former orchard and fields, are growing up in forest. I partnered with realtors, developers, kind of energy efficiency consultants to design and plan for a kind of clustered small-scale agrohood. So rehabilitation of the farmhouse, addition of multiple different scale residential properties, residential houses and units. So shared housing and individual properties all clustered around the farmstead, and then bring a lot of the rest of the land into agriculture and forestry production and uses. The long-term vision for this is that the land would be held in a commons-based structure The houses would be individually owned by residents through what's called a ground lease, where they would lease the land, they would own the house. Some of the housing and the main farmstead house that existed and would be rehabbed would be owned by the community and leased out to farmers and other community members. This is still in process because it's winding its way through local and state approval and permitting process. And that, in many times, in my experience, takes years of planning. And even when zoning promotes and advocates for things like this and gives bonus credit in different ways for designs like this, there's still a lot of kind of time and process to get approval from the different bodies needed, to get local community buy-in. So we're at that stage of final approvals now, and then getting back to kind of on the ground development of this, which will then be several years out because the development is staged as well. But I bring this up because this might be relative to many, or at least some landowners that you encounter who have farm and thoughts of some financial return and some development and some agriculture and some conservation. That, you know, there's not a one size fits all for property. There's a way to look at land as kind of a mosaic of different uses, different ownership, different values achieved. It can take a long time, and it can take multiple partners to bring things about. But, you know, we really need to be creative to ensure that farms, even those farms that are neglected and long since fallow, are brought back into community use and are brought back into production. So sorry, go ahead.
There's a question in the chat that someone was asking how large that farmland was.
Oh, so thanks. So this one here is 120 acres. So this kind of green is, you know, just barely bleeding over the property lines that you can see under them, split by road in the middle. And it's, yeah, there's some steeper terrain here. There's some wet areas, but most of it is good tillable ground and good forest land and good highly developable land. It's right, like less than a quarter mile to the village center in this town. So 2 properties to the east is the elementary school in the town, and the library is there. So all of this is walkable to town center, walkable to schools. All of this provides housing needs for farmers, for teachers, for other community stakeholders. And the housing mix as it sits, it's a historic town with green and large houses that are oversized for many who live there. And it's New Hampshire's one of the oldest states in the nation, and this town is right in line with that. So it's, you know, an elderly population with oversized houses who would like to stay in the town and love the town for certain things, but need to downsize. So it's hitting in different kind of buyer interest housing needs that exist in the town and developing this agriculture. So, and our work, the Farmers Land Trust and this Farm Commons work is just beginning now. We've been developing this work and doing this work for a number of years elsewhere, but we're just newly founded, the Farmers Land Trust, the organization we co-lead, and we're just beginning to kind of launch out and collaborate with communities in states indicated here on this map and others as they outreach to us. All of our work is by invitation. We're only working when we're asked to come to that region or that community, and then we're only moving forward when there's the viable aspects, the landowners, farmers, community partners, and stakeholders with some shared alignment around values and some shared alignment around what's viable as land transition projects. But yeah, we're doing this work across the country, and it's deeply needed in many communities for many reasons. So thank you for being here. We, as I promised, tried to go quick to leave time for questions. Grateful to have this time together and happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Well, thank you, Ian and Kristina. And while this screen is still up, if people want to scan that corner, I see the opportunity. If you just want to know what that's about, grab your phone and scan that for future use. I'd love to start, if we could take off screen share for after that, and see if there are questions in the room. I know I have jotted some down for myself, but I want to make space for those who are here. So maybe we're at a good place to see each other in the room again. And you can use the reaction button to raise your hand. We can start a queue for that. And I'll help bring people's voice together.
Yeah, and I do see there were a couple of questions in the chat that were all focused on asking about what missions are best aligned with the Farmland Commons. So as Ian shared, we work where we're invited, and typically it's farmland owners or farmers that invite us, or organizations. And typically those organizations have missions that they are already focused on something to do with this work, whether it be food or land, agriculture, etc. But these commons are limited landholding entities that allow nonprofits that do not have aligned missions that make this work within their scope. So they can be part of creating a Farmland Commons. And that is one of the beauties of it, is that because it is a separate entity, that existing nonprofit gets to be part of something that they would normally not have gotten to be part of, and to be able to support it in a different way.
So, and just, we can move to you next, Seth, but just the one other question I saw, and sorry for missing something in the chat, was just a little more on that Jacobson Farm project that I had the slide on. And so I'd answer that and also frame more largely in the work we do. So in that case, the land is held by the family who's held that ownership for 4 generations now. It's 2 elderly sisters who are, the land has fallen out of production years ago when their parents passed. They now inherited the property. Neither one lives on the property or close by, but they're wanting to see the agriculture preserved. They're needing to see a financial return from sale. They're patient in some ways because they inherited the property and they live elsewhere. They just need to kind of see an exit to that. So they are holding ownership of the property and receiving some staged deposits over the years as permitting kind of milestones are hit. And then with all permitting approved now, the property will transfer, and then the kind of on the ground development will begin. For our work with the Farmers Land Trust, all of our work requires aligned landowners who are patient with time, who are willing to understand that there's values to the property, financial and otherwise, that are not tied to a market-based sale. So in our work, we work with landowners who are able to and willing to donate land. We work with landowners who are able to and willing to sell land. All sales have some discount built into them. There's tax benefits for landowners to sell to a nonprofit land trust. So sometimes that is the motivation for their discount. Other times it's kind of alignment around values or some combination of the two. But we're only able to work, us as an organization are only able to work with landowners who are patient and willing to kind of move into a transition of their land that is not simply driven by, competing with days on market-based pricing and other things. We just can't compete. And it's also not where we want to be. We're, as I mentioned to begin with, we're decommodifying land and reframing the value. And we need the exiting landowner to be part of that as well. There's a lot of land in transition right now. We're not in the business or wanting to chase landowners who are not aligned with us.
And really, I mean, that is because land has appreciated by astronomical rates every decade, so by 40% per decade. So farmers who are exiting absolutely deserve to be given the money needed for aging, retirement, care into old age, all of those things, but maybe not, we cannot compete, like Ian shared, at market prices, which are outrageous. Like they are not aligned with what farmland can do, how we should manage, and really how we should be not extracting from earth and land. David, I am, should we just try to respond to the questions in the chat, or should we let people ask right now? I'm not sure how to.
Let's, since we have a couple of hands raised, why don't we go
Okay.
there and we'll see if we weave back into the chat. Yeah, thanks. Yes, Seth.
Perfect. And I think this connects to what Karen was asking about zoning. My question is, did this property need any type of variance or change in zoning? And for those that the restrictive zoning, any suggestions on pathway forward?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll just share that we as a land trust and all conservation land trusts and all community land trusts are all subject to all permitting, zoning, laws. You know, we have to also work within this system that we are being presented with. So those are factors to consider when deciding whether to move forward with a land project or the creation of a farmland commons, or how we all want to move forward together around a piece of land.
Yeah, so the zoning on this example project was agriculture, rural, residential. So it allowed agriculture, it allowed residential. There was innovative zoning put in this town about 10 years prior that spoke to all the other aspects, the clustered development, the rehabilitation of historic farm homes, the active agricultural use, the recreation benefits for towns. So zoning allowed what was going to happen, and innovative zoning encouraged all the things we're proposing, and it was still difficult. There are other projects not shared here where we've had to get zoning variances or special use exceptions. I've sat on the local, I don't now, it's been years since, but I sat on the local zoning board for just about a dozen years, and so had that experience coming into this work. But that can be challenging, and that can be a significant obstacle, but that, there can be pathways around that, but they're time consuming and difficult.
Thank you.
Next, I see Roy's hand.
Yeah, just a comment or two concerning conservation easements, versus the 99-year lease. I've not done 99-year leases, but I've done a number of conservation easements and written a number of conservation easements, and I can see where there could be perhaps a benefit to an easement over a lease, if in fact the land trust is paying for that conservation easement. So that could give the landowner a nice infusion of cash to improve conditions, equipment, hoop out, whatever it might be. We've modified easements, we've amended easements at Allegheny Land Trust. It's there's devil's in the details. It depends on the I guess magnitude of the amendment, but it's possible. And also when we're drafting easements, we try to draft them to be as flexible as possible. So you try to avoid those amendments down the road. But if you know that the land is going to be agriculture for its, for perpetuity per se, you could draft those easements to be pretty flexible to allow those farmers to do pretty much whatever they need to do, as long as it's not detrimental to the natural attributes that you're trying to protect. So just kind of a plug for easements. You have monitoring requirements you may not have with a 99-year lease, but nevertheless, I think they're possibly a very, very good tool in this field.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much, Roy. And we do very often partner with conservation easements to put with conservation land trusts to place easements on farmland that we are working with. And for two reasons, one of which you mentioned as that it can be a great source of funding to lower the cost of land that we need to fundraise for. It also brings such a great partnership and collaboration and more support and protection to land. So while we don't hold easements ourselves, we do very often seek out other land trusts to work with to put, and not everyone is as thoughtful as you and Allegheny Land Trust have been. So sometimes, but it is really great to work with people who are thinking about that long term, like what are the farmers in 100 years going to need to do? Like, how can we make this as flexible while still preserving the land? And that's so wonderful. So thank you.
I see Brooke.
I put this question in the chat, so I will say it aloud now to take it out of chat. How have you dealt with, or how do you foresee transitioning folks if they decide farming is not actually for them after they've taken on a lease and have built equity in this place and want their home to remain there, but don't want to be a farmer anymore, but you still need folks to farm the land? Like, I just see that potentially leading to one of these developments, or whatever we want to call it, then ending up with a bunch of farmers who again don't live there, which is the problem we're now trying to solve. Like, I can argue both sides of it. I see. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so the lease itself speaks to the active use of agriculture on the land, and it allows for a break in active use because of, life events, climate events, farm business events. So it accommodates things that are going to come up in land, but ultimately the lease is getting at an active requirement for agriculture on the land. And that's back to the just prior comments on the conservation easement. Like, conservation easements are a great tool to like prohibit things and restrict things. Some organizations use them more on that affirmative, what are they going to require as far as actions, but very few do that. And we would argue and feel that the lease is a better tool for those affirmative active things that are expected on the ground, and the easement is a better tool for prohibiting things that are not desired on the ground, and together they work really well. But ultimately the lease is going to say active agriculture is required and the type of agriculture, and if those don't play out and they're beyond the window for kind of fallow land, then steps would be taken to terminate that lease, to enter into a new lease with party for new farmer to come onto the land and practice agriculture and bring the land into active use. A house would be handled with a different agreement. So, farmer could stop farming and their rental agreement for the house is going to have different language than the lease of the land for agriculture. What that local community commons decides, whether there are more than one houses and, farmer could stop farming and still live in the house, and there's another house for other farmer to come in and actively farm and move into that house or not, it is going to kind of make that decision as to whether to tie the house to the farmland and the active use or not. But they would be, the devil in the details are all together in the lease itself.
Yeah, looks like Lorena's next up.
Thanks. And wow, thank you so much for this really wonderful presentation and for the great work you're doing. I just have a quick question. So I actually went on the website. Thank you for who provided the link. And so as an architect, my question is, I love everything about the land, and it seems like net positive homes but look very traditional. I wonder if you've been successful in attracting some innovative architects that might have some, more, what can I say? These houses don't feel like they have much connection to the land. It's kind of like the houses that we're fixing all the time because they're like designed inward and not together with. I just came from a conference about neuroscience and architecture, and I just wondered where you were going with that.
Yeah. So right. So that Jacobson Farm transformation website is where you're referring to, and the houses there. The material put out on the houses there was purposeful because those houses look like the other houses that are in this village center in town, and we're already kind of creating something was different in many ways. So, the hope would be that kind of after the first few houses are built, that there's kind of a more openness, and now that the permits and approvals are in place, there's a little more freedom to be more expansive and creative with the housing, but didn't want to kind of raise questions about these, you know, different looking houses. Although that's our preference and values, we kind of had to fit within the expected subdivision applications that are going forward in that area to get the approvals needed.
Great.
I'll just pause. It's my hand's up next, but if others are waiting, make space for attendees. And if not, I have a number of questions, and I'll just share since I don't see other ones coming. I see Emmett actually. Want to make space for that. Emmett.
Hi there. Yeah, my question is about property values and the application of this type of land trust work in areas where there's heavy development pressure. So in my case in particular, I have a 50-acre farm that's outside of a high growth urban area. Now it's in Oregon, so there's limitations on development, but we've seen neighbor farms get exceptions to be able to do development in the area. So there's a lot of price pressure on the properties themselves. So I'm wondering if that influences the availability of funding for these types of projects, whether there's essentially you're trying to avoid areas with this type of pressure, or if in some cases that actually gives benefits to priority for things like grants or other partner organizations that may be providing funding for these types of projects.
Yeah, so some of it's very relative to place and the communities engaged. So, you know, some very high value land areas have great wealth. So there's people who are willing to donate capital to acquire land at that price, or you know, the mission and outcome of a project in a certain area can attract interest and wealth and capital from elsewhere to support that. So no, like our goal is to really work across the country in very innovative communities and spaces, so it can kind of show expansively how this model can adapt and be informed by place and by needs of community and land, and be utilized in those places. So, you know, but that doesn't mean we can work anywhere regardless of what the cost is. It's all relative to what the amount of support might be.
And really what the impact will be. You know, so we're not really measuring on like how many acres we're conserving. We're measuring on what the impact to community is. And so if there is intense development pressure, you know, that's part of it. Like, obviously we need to save farmland from intense development pressure, but also like, who is going to benefit from this? Like, who are those farmers going to be? What community support is there already? Like, there are many factors because there's so much need for the work that we are doing. We are, you know, we hear all over the time, every day, from farmers, from landowners, from people all over the country who need this, who really want to engage in this, but we need to be strategic in where we work to where we'll have the most impact, the most support, etc.
Thank you.
And well, maybe I'll seize this moment. So my question is about seeing those two case studies. Is really beautiful to see. And my mind is wandering now to like the early stage projects, what the first, like you say, you're invited. Like, can you walk me through that moment of being invited and kind of assessing that impacts, like what impacts you start to sense this project might have, and what are the pieces in the ecosystem that you need to see available for it to be a right project that's ready to go?
Yeah, sure. So I guess on that the Jacobson Farm one, I was invited by the landowner. I've done a lot of work in Southern New Hampshire over the years, so I've had a lot of contact with landowners and just impact in towns around here. So kind of like get a lot of kind of out of the blue outreach from landowners and towns with questions and kind of help with a project. So here was landowner one of the sisters lives in New Hampshire, one lives elsewhere, but they had inherited this property. They had to sell it to generate some revenue, but they really wanted to create this legacy and see farming brought back, and they didn't want to see the house be bulldozed. So there was certain values they had and a certain vision for the future, and they contacted me. So I met with them a number of times just to hear what that was and to learn and kind of build in my mind what my different pathways and different outcomes that might be possible. And then I started to pull in partners like the developer and planners, and who would be aligned with that landowner's vision and would have the needed knowledge and assets and resources, and kind of put together this team of people, then help negotiate agreement between LLC formed and the landowner to kind of transfer property, and to this staged approach to payment and approvals and permit. And then it's kind of now moving forward with all of those parties without me. And then once it gets kind of back to this stage, coming back in as consultant support around agricultural uses, kind of broader land stewardship would be a way that we could engage now as an organization in that. So that was in that case, and that's the way many of the situations now, like we get contact from landowners or community groups with a specific farm property in mind, and a challenge of how to create the vision they want, knowing that it's likely not going to move in that direction if not for kind of our support and creativity and bringing together a collaboration of people and organizations.
And on that collaboration point, do you have your own attorneys that you work with, or does that tend to be local to the project, or how does that piece of the ecosystem work?
Yeah, we do have attorneys throughout the country that we work on, the legal templates with, and then we always utilize an in-state local attorney for state law review.
Thank you. Any other questions in the field? We're at about 11 after. I also want to make sure that people know how to find you as well before we wrap up. Mark, if you have access, if you could drop their links in the chat, if they haven't already. I haven't been able to
I can do it. I can do it. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. And I see one other. Yeah, Jeff.
Hey there. I'm curious how you see this model working on smaller scale sites, say in the 2 to 10 acre range, if you know of any examples of those or ways you could see that being beneficial and, still creating community.
Yeah, I mean, this, kind of comes to another question in the chat about like farm size, and also touches on something I previously mentioned, which is what we're focused on is impact. So protecting farmland, but also what is that going to mean to the community? And this whole model is around supporting farm viability and creating a sustainable farm business. And so we have done projects where it was urban and it was just 3 acres. And what that meant for the community and the transformation that has meant for food access and also agricultural education has been profound. Very worthy of support.
Did that smaller project have housing included with it, or was the housing already there? It was just farm?
Just land, yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I did just put our emails and also our website in the chat. And we're super happy to answer any questions or to have a follow-up meeting with anyone with specific questions or interest.
Well, thank you so much. On behalf of Latitude, we're very grateful for all your contributions in our community. And if people want to stay engaged with the community in conversations like this, I also put a link in the chat for our Mighty Networks where you can pose questions similar to things you might raise in this type of engagement, and create conversation threads around really nitty-gritty conversations around land holding and land stewardship and regenerative real estate practices. So feel free to check us out there. See Mark, see your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to put in one more plug to, if you would like to support the efforts of the Farmland Commons, I put the link to make a contribution for Giving Tuesday or any day. That QR code that was at the end of Ian and Christina's presentation in the chat, so you can click on that if you didn't get a chance to do that with at the end of the presentation, and you can join me in making a contribution.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate the time and the conversation. And yeah, hopefully this sparks interest and kind of that opportunity to collaborate.
Yeah, thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you everyone for being here.
Thanks, you too.